If you keep trying to win certain arguments, you're not just losing energy, you're losing years of leverage. There are people in your life who don't argue to solve problems. They argue to regulate themselves. And every time you engage, you become the fuel source. Your focus fractures, your income trajectory plateaus. Promotions slip because your cognitive bandwidth is quietly consumed by rehearsing conversations that never resolve. The conflict isn't the issue, the pattern is. Neuroscience is clear. When a threat response becomes someone's baseline identity, escalation feels stabilizing. Your logic doesn't calm the system, it destabilizes it, so it escalates harder. Every explanation becomes more fuel, every emotional reaction becomes reinforcement. And here's the hidden cost. If this loop runs for 5 years, you don't just lose peace, you lose optionality. Your nervous system stays reactive, your decision quality drops, your long-term positioning erodes. This isn't about being cold, it's about understanding extinction learning. What happens when a behavior stops being rewarded? In this video, I'll show you each to 3 signs you're feeding a high-conflict loop, and 1 adjustment that restores your energy and leverage. You wake up already mid-conversation. Not out loud, not in the room, but in your head. You replay the tone they used, the sentence you didn't finish, the point you should have made more clearly. You mentally reorganize the timeline of what happened so it sounds tighter, more logical, harder to dismiss. Then your phone lights up. Email, Slack, calendar reminder, a small client issue that needs clarification, a message you could answer in 2 minutes, but you don't. Not yet. Instead, you draft a response to the argument, not to send, just to perfect. You stand up, coffee, shower, back to your desk. You open the spreadsheet you were supposed to review yesterday. There's nothing complex about it. It's familiar work. Minor corrections. A decision about pricing that you've been postponing for a week because it requires a bigger conversation. You tell yourself you'll handle that later. Another notification. It's them. Not aggressive, not explosive, just a small clarification that reopens the thread. You type carefully, measured, controlled, reasonable. You explain your position again, this time cleaner, more concise. You remove emotional language, you focus on facts. You press send. For a few seconds it feels complete. Then the waiting starts. You refresh once, then again. You open another tab, try to focus on the spreadsheet. Your eyes move across the numbers, but the background process is still running. You imagine their reply. You anticipate the angle they'll take. You prepare counterpoints. A colleague messages you about a meeting later this week. You respond politely, efficiently, but you choose the safe option. Keep the scope small. Avoid pushing for the larger proposal you've been considering. Not today. Your calendar fills with manageable tasks, small wins, clean completions, nothing risky. By mid-afternoon, you've worked all day. You've answered messages, solved problems, moved projects forward. But the bigger decision, the one that could change your positioning, is still untouched. Another reply arrives. This time, the issue shifts slightly. It's no longer about the original disagreement. It's about tone, or intention, or what was really meant. You clarify again. You don't raise your voice. You don't insult. You don't escalate. You just try to win cleanly. By evening, you're tired in a specific way. Not physically exhausted, cognitively split. Dinner feels muted. You check your phone one more time. No new message. Relief, but not resolution. Before bed, you replay the exchange one more time, adjusting phrasing in your head like you're editing a script that never quite locks. Tomorrow, you'll be sharper. Tomorrow, you'll explain it in a way that finally settles it, and nothing in your day looked irresponsible. You worked, you responded, you stayed calm, you handled it. But something subtle is happening. The argument is no longer just a disagreement. It's following you into rooms where it doesn't belong, and you haven't yet noticed what it's starting to replace. The next morning feels normal. You sit down, open your laptop, scan your inbox. There's no explosion, no dramatic escalation, just a short reply. It doesn't resolve anything, it reframes it. You read it once, then again. You don't answer immediately this time. You tell yourself that's progress. You're not reactive, but you are thinking about it. While reviewing a proposal, you pause mid-sentence, not because the work is complex, but because you're simulating how the next exchange will go. You predict their wording. You draft responses silently. This becomes background noise. You don't notice the shift at first. Your mind now checks for conflict the way it checks for email. Small refreshes, micro scans. You start optimizing your phrasing preemptively in other conversations too. With co-workers, with clients. You over-clarify small details to avoid potential misinterpretation. Meetings feel slightly tighter. You speak carefully. You leave less room for ambiguity. It looks like maturity. It feels like control. But you're allocating energy differently. Later that week, you consider pushing back on a deadline that doesn't make sense. You decide not to. You don't want another debate layered on top of the existing one, so you absorb it. That decision costs you an hour of extra work. Not catastrophic, just absorbed. Another evening passes where you mentally rehearse a conversation that hasn't happened yet. You imagine finally landing the perfect sentence, the one that makes everything click. You've told yourself this is about clarity, but something subtle is shifting. You now measure progress in arguments by how airtight your logic feels, not by whether anything actually changes. The exchanges continue. Each one slightly different, each one requiring a little preparation. You notice you're quicker to defend small things now, faster to justify, faster to explain context before it's even questioned. Your tone is still calm, your reasoning is still clean, but your baseline is more alert, and there's a quiet consequence you don't name. You're spending peak cognitive hours stabilizing something that never stabilizes. By Friday, your task list is complete, but the strategic proposal you wanted to outline, the one that could reposition your role, is still sitting in drafts. You didn't avoid it intentionally. You just never had uninterrupted mental bandwidth. The conflict hasn't grown. It hasn't exploded. It's just persistent. And persistence, when paired with your willingness to engage, begins to shape your schedule. You still believe you're moving toward resolution. You haven't yet considered the possibility that resolution isn't the goal on the other side. At some point you start noticing something small, not dramatic, just a pattern. Every disagreement feels like it's about to close. There's a moment in each exchange where you think, okay, this is the part where it settles. You clarify, they respond, you adjust, they reinterpret. The topic shifts slightly. It's no longer about the original issue. It's about how you brought it up, or what you implied, or whether your tone suggests something underneath. So you refine again. You stay calm. You stick to specifics. You separate emotion from fact, and still it stretches. A week passes. Then two, the same themes resurface in new packaging. You start to anticipate this. When you open a message from them, you don't just read what's written. You scan for what it might become. You prepare two versions of a reply, the direct one and the softened one. You choose the softened one. At work, something else shifts. You notice you're slower to initiate friction elsewhere. A pricing adjustment you've been considering, you postpone it. A negotiation you could push harder on, you let it slide. You tell yourself you're conserving energy. But what's really happening is simpler. You already have one unresolved loop running. You don't want another. The first tangible consequence appears quietly. Your decisions get safer, not worse, not irresponsible, just narrower. In a meeting, an opportunity comes up, a project slightly outside your current scope. It would require visibility, some tension, some negotiation. You stay quiet a little longer than usual. Someone else volunteers. You feel neutral about it, almost relieved. Later that night, another exchange happens. It begins calmly, then it bends. You explain again that your intention wasn't what they're implying. They respond by dissecting your explanation. You feel the pull to clarify once more, and you do, because this time it will land. Except it doesn't close, it just resets. The next morning, you wake up thinking about it before your alarm finishes ringing. That's new. You check your phone before getting out of bed. Nothing yet, but your body is already bracing. You still believe you're in a series of isolated conflicts. You haven't labeled it a loop. But here's what's now observable. The arguments don't resolve. They recycle, and each cycle requires slightly more precision from you, slightly more restraint, slightly more energy. Your work output is still strong. Your calendar is still full. Your responsibilities are still handled. But your cognitive bandwidth, the part that initiates, risks, negotiates, expands, is being quietly pre-allocated, not to growth, to containment. And containment, over time, changes what you attempt. You don't feel weaker, you feel occupied. The conflict still looks like the problem, but something else is beginning to show. Resolution is never actually the outcome. Continuation is. By now you've adjusted. You read more carefully. You respond more slowly. You remove adjectives, shorten sentences, strip anything that could be interpreted. You believe that if you stay precise enough, calm enough, consistent enough, the exchanges will eventually flatten. But something else is happening. When you stay calm, they intensify. Not explosively, strategically. If you stay logical, they introduce emotion. If you stay factual, they introduce interpretation. If you disengage slightly, they increase urgency. It doesn't feel chaotic. It feels adaptive. And that's when a quiet realization starts forming. The escalation isn't random. It stabilizes something for them. You notice a rhythm. Tension builds. You respond. They heighten. You explain. They counter. There's energy in it, focus, engagement. And when the exchange peaks, there's a strange sense of equilibrium. Not resolution, but equilibrium. You start recognizing that the conflict itself creates momentum. Without it, there's distance. Without it, there's stillness. And stillness seems uncomfortable for them. So, when things begin to settle, something new gets introduced. A small critique, a reinterpretation, a reminder of something unresolved. The cycle reactivates. At work, the consequences remain subtle. You're still competent, still reliable. But your cognitive rhythm has changed. You structure your day around potential disruptions. You leave small gaps in your schedule in case a message arrives. You avoid deep work blocks longer than an hour because you don't trust they'll remain uninterrupted. You call this flexibility, but it's fragmentation. A concrete cost appears. You miss a window. A client asks for a proposal revision. You intend to respond with a strategic upsell, expand the scope, increase the value. Instead, you send a minimal adjustment, cleaner, safer, faster. It keeps things smooth, but it doesn't expand anything. Later that night, another argument begins. You try something different. You reduce your explanation, shorter response, less detail. For a moment it quiets. Then the escalation increases faster than usual. You feel the pull to defend your brevity, to clarify that you're not dismissing, to explain your tone. And you do. Again. You still believe you're solving isolated misunderstandings, but the pattern is clearer now. Your logic doesn't calm the exchange, it destabilizes it. Because if escalation regulates them, de-escalation feels like loss of control, so they escalate harder. Every explanation becomes fuel. Every emotional shift becomes reinforcement. You're not being irrational, you're being reasonable, consistently reasonable, and yet the loop tightens. You haven't named it yet, but you're starting to feel something new. It's not about winning the argument. It's about what happens to your energy every time you try. Nothing collapses. That's what makes this hard to notice. Your life still functions, you still perform, you still deliver, but the pattern has matured. The arguments are no longer surprising, they're expected. You anticipate the spike before it happens. And because you anticipate it, you adjust your day around it. You don't schedule important conversations late in the afternoon anymore. That's when exchanges tend to flare. You avoid initiating ambitious moves during weeks that already feel tense. You delay sending proposals that require assertiveness if there's an unresolved thread active. You tell yourself you're being strategic. But slowly, your growth decisions begin syncing with someone else's emotional rhythm. That's the ceiling forming. Not imposed externally, self-adjusted. A concrete cost shows up. Your income doesn't drop, it just stops expanding. You maintain your current level comfortably, reliably, but you stop pushing into higher leverage negotiations. You stop asking for expanded scope. You stop introducing friction that could reposition you, because friction already exists somewhere else. And your system has decided one source of tension is enough. Months pass, then a year. The arguments evolve in theme, but not in structure. Each time you think, this is the last version of this, each time it mutates. You begin to notice something more subtle. Your baseline state is more alert than it used to be, not anxious, prepared, ready to defend, ready to clarify, ready to respond. You don't enter rooms fully neutral anymore. You enter slightly braced, and that bracing follows you into decisions. When an opportunity requires boldness, your mind calculates potential pushback before potential upside. When someone challenges you professionally, you feel a sharper internal reaction than you used to. Your reactivity threshold is lowered, not dramatically, just enough. Here's the quiet escalation. You are becoming optimized for containment instead of expansion. 5 years of this doesn't look dramatic either. It looks stable, income steady, career respectable, conflict ongoing. But optionality narrows. You don't build new alliances as freely. You don't take strategic risks as often. You don't pursue moves that require sustained mental clarity because your clarity is pre-allocated. The loop hasn't destroyed anything. It has redirected you. And redirection, sustained over years, compounds. You still think the cost is emotional, energy, peace, but it's becoming structural. Your leverage is no longer expanding at the rate your effort would normally justify. Not because you're incapable, not because you lack skill, but because a portion of your cognitive bandwidth is permanently reserved for managing a pattern that never resolves. You haven't lost control, you've just adapted. And adaptation, when misaligned, becomes a ceiling. At some point, the pattern stops feeling disruptive. It feels normal. You know how to handle it. You know when to respond, when to pause, when to soften language. You've become efficient inside it. And that's when the structure becomes visible. Your effort became routine. Routine created stability. Stability reduced responsiveness. And when responsiveness drops, results stop reacting. In the beginning, you were simply trying to resolve a disagreement. Then you began rehearsing conversations. Then you adjusted your schedule around potential flare-ups. Then you avoided adding new friction elsewhere. Now the loop is integrated. It doesn't spike your heart rate like it used to. It doesn't ruin your day. It just occupies space. Space that used to belong to risk-taking, to deep thinking, to strategic moves that require uninterrupted focus. You still work hard. But your effort compounds differently now. Instead of building outward leverage, it maintains internal equilibrium. Here's the structural connection you couldn't see earlier. Every time escalation was met with explanation, the pattern was reinforced. Not emotionally, behaviorally. Escalation produced engagement. Engagement produced energy. Energy stabilized the dynamic. So escalation continued. Meanwhile, your brain learned something too. It learned to stay slightly reactive, slightly vigilant, slightly prepared. That reactivity doesn't shut off when you open a spreadsheet. It doesn't disappear in negotiations. It subtly shapes how bold you're willing to be. And here's the tangible outcome. Your results stop scaling with your effort. You work the same hours. You deliver the same quality. But growth flattens. Because leverage requires excess cognitive bandwidth, and yours is partially pre-committed, you start to notice something else. When there's a quiet week, no conflict, no escalation, you feel unsettled. Not because you want tension, but because your system has adapted to operating inside it. Calm feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar states require energy to navigate. So when tension reappears, there's a strange familiarity, predictable roles, predictable moves, predictable escalation. The loop is now self-sustaining. Not because you're weak, not because they're malicious, but because both sides are behaving consistently. You provide clarity, they provide escalation. The exchange continues. And while it continues, your long-term positioning erodes slowly. Not visibly, structurally. 5 years of stable output with flat expansion. 5 years of maintained competence without multiplied leverage. 5 years where optionality could have widened, but instead held steady. The conflict was never the real cost. The opportunity cost was. And now you can see the full connection. Effort became routine. Routine created stability. Stability reduced responsiveness. Responsiveness determines leverage. When responsiveness shrinks, so does growth. The loop doesn't explode your life, it absorbs it. And once you see that, the final question isn't how to win the argument. It's what happens when the fuel disappears. By now the pattern is clear. It was never about a single disagreement. It was about reinforcement. Escalation produced engagement. Engagement produced energy. Energy sustained the loop. And your leverage slowly flattened in the background. Before the adjustment, you need to recognize the signals. Here are 3 behavioral indicators that you're feeding a high-conflict loop. 1. You prepare more than the outcome changes. If your explanations get sharper, cleaner, more structured, but the frequency of conflict stays the same or increases, you're reinforcing, not resolving. 2. Calm responses trigger stronger reactions. When reducing emotion increases escalation, that's not misunderstanding, that's destabilization. The dynamic depends on intensity. 3. You allocate peak cognitive hours to containment. If your most alert mental states are spent anticipating, rehearsing, or managing exchanges instead of building leverage, the loop is already integrated. None of this means you're weak. It means the pattern has been rewarded. So what changes it? Not persuasion, not better arguments, not perfect tone. The adjustment is behavioral, not verbal. Remove reinforcement. This is what extinction learning looks like in real life, when escalation no longer produces extended engagement, when intensity no longer generates detailed explanation, when emotional spikes receive logistical, time-bound responses instead of open-ended processing. The loop destabilizes, not immediately. At first, escalation often increases. That's predictable, because the system is trying to recover its previous equilibrium. But if reinforcement remains absent, the pattern weakens. You stop donating energy. You stop optimizing your day around potential flare-ups. You respond on schedule, not on impulse. Short, clean, final, no emotional amplitude, no extended defense, and something shifts. Your cognitive bandwidth begins to return. Not dramatically, gradually. You notice you can sit in deep work longer without scanning your phone. You initiate negotiations without pre-calculating emotional backlash. You propose ideas that create friction and handle that friction without feeling already depleted. Your stress baseline lowers. Your long-term thinking reappears. And here's the structural closure. When escalation no longer yields engagement, it loses utility. When it loses utility, it loses frequency. When it loses frequency, your responsiveness returns. And responsiveness is leverage. This isn't about being cold. It's not indifference, it's regulated engagement. It's removing incentives that keep a high conflict identity stable. 5 years from now, the difference won't be visible in how calm you were during arguments. It will be visible in your optionality, in whether your income compounded, in whether your positioning expanded, in whether your nervous system feels reactive or available. You don't win by out-arguing a loop. You win by no longer financing it. And when the fuel disappears, so does the ceiling.